A few years ago, I started a doodle diary. I had challenged myself to be disciplined and try and find my art style, and it made me produce a lot. But the collection of illustrations that came out of it wasn't entirely my intention. Really, it started just because I was always a creative person, and my issue was just that I couldn't stick to any one thing. Jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. So one day, I remember I didn't have a whole lot in mind. I don't think I was particularly thinking of anything. I think I was really just putting pen to paper. And a really important illustration came out of it for me. And it might not mean a whole lot to anyone else, or maybe it will. Who knows? I have the original somewhere around here. She might actually be hanging up. This is a little bit of an updated version. Still not a whole lot, so don't hold your breath. So it's just a person with a building on his head. It's not anything crazy, but I remember not having a whole lot in mind when I produced this. And I ended up titling it, Everyone I've Met Lives in My Head. Ever since then, this has become the illustration that I most identify with. It's really become me. The more I think about it, the more I look at it, everyone I've met lives in my head. And I'm sure a lot of other people have felt that way. So for me personally, because this feels like such a personal piece to me, something about showing it just feels vulnerable to me, even if no one else knows what it's about. But I guess to backtrack, for me, when I was growing up, I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I was quieter. I kind of just kept to myself. And also, I just don't think a lot of other people were interested in me. And also had somewhat of a turbulent home life. So I remember just really living in my thoughts. I didn't have a whole lot of people to turn to. The people who were in my life didn't feel like those safe places to talk about certain things. All of that didn't lead to a whole lot of self-expression for me. I felt like I didn't have places to put my thoughts or feelings. So I remember at some point there was a spoken word poem somewhere. I don't know if anyone else was always into those, but I remember always wanting to listen to them. And there was one that I can't remember who it was by or what it was called, but the point was that there was a girl, and I think she was talking about being like at her family dinner table, and it's her brother, and her parents, and just the difference between her brother growing up at that dinner table versus her growing up at that dinner table, and how she would watch him grow the way that sometimes guys do, where they start growing up and they start, being louder, demanding to be heard, taking up more space. I think they call it like man spreading, but quite literally the way that they position themselves when they, sit or lay down or lounge or anywhere. It's like they take up a lot of space physically. So she was talking about a lot of that stuff, and how sometimes as a girl, you are more so taught to grow in. Not in like a really positive, introspective, reflective way. I think I identified with that also partially because in a Hispanic household, maybe not all, but probably a lot, there's certain expectations of girls. Girls and boys are raised pretty differently. And I remember being hit with some of that stuff where it was, girls should be looked at, not heard. You look prettier when you're quieter. You're more beautiful when you speak less. Things like that. Not the most fun, but all of it kind of, makes you grow inwards. I really and truly lived in my head. I started, analyzing things and thinking things over, and just because this was my life at some point doesn't mean that, I hated everyone in it. I loved everyone in my life. I really did. So when these expectations were, put on me, or these things were said, or people would leave, I would just think and think and think and think and think about it. I would turn it over a million times, a scenario, a person, myself. And I just lived in my head. It was all I did. It felt like a whole universe in there. It felt huge. So much bigger than this world ever was when I was growing up, really. Which meant that I became pretty observant. I watched a lot of the things that were going on around me, and I thought about them. I really tried to figure them out. I tried my best to understand things. I tried my best to look at everything from every single perspective that could be out there. As I grew up, people would leave. Not everyone's meant to stay in your life for forever. Some people are seasons. So sometimes people that played a big role in my life were no longer in it. And, I would think it over a million times and try to understand, why these decisions are made, how this happened, what was my role, is this for the best? What could it have been like in all of those possibilities? I thought about a lot of things when something like that would happen. But on the opposite side, for a lot of the people that stayed, the way that I grew up, we really saw everyone's flaws. We saw and heard everyone's mistakes. It was a different time, and I don't think as much was hidden, at least not in my situation. So I remember always wanting to understand the people who left, and also wanting to understand the people who were still there, and how to hold all of them close to me. At least all of the parts that I wanted, that, I found valuable and that I loved, or that I could get something out of. I needed to hold those parts of them with me. Everything serves a purpose. I think you can learn from anything. It was such an interesting reality check to have from so young, and also I just think my whole life, to think about those things and to witness those things, and to be able to really pick at my own brain and try and pick at other people's brains to just understand. And I don't know if I ever fully will, but it's what I did. It's just what I did for so long. God, if we could have a step tracker in our minds, I would love to know how many miles I have ran around and around and around trying to understand things. Yeah. And I think when I produced this little doodle, this first of this kind of illustration series, this very black and white, really minimalistic illustration, when I produced it, I wasn't thinking about it, and then all of a sudden I was like, it's me though. This feels very me. And I think I've heard recently, probably a TikTok audio or something, or some kind of clip from somewhere, but there's a sound and it's some girl talking, and she uses the phrase, I connect everything, but I'm not attached to anything. And I think that's a little of how I view this, because I thought about everything so much. I remember a lot. I remember a lot of people, a lot of experiences, a lot of things I was told, a lot of things I said. And I think with a lot of the people, especially the people that I knew were flawed, it was obvious and it was upfront. I learned how to take the good and leave the bad. Just because I loved someone or liked someone at some point in my life, enjoyed spending time with them, doesn't mean that I had to necessarily put them on a pedestal. It didn't always mean that they had to stay in my life. It didn't mean that I had to idolize them. It didn't mean any of those things. But were there parts to a lot of these people or experiences that we shared that I thought were particularly useful, and something that I I could call back to, absolutely. I have so many examples of that. And I think because of that, all of the people that I've met really do live in my head. They're all in there. I learned so much from so many people. And again, there's a lot of people that I maybe don't even know what they're like today, but I knew what they were like at some point. And to me, in my head, it was important to keep that version around. Overall, it felt beneficial. So sometimes when I think about visualizing what my head is like, it feels like that. It feels like a city and apartment buildings, complexes with all of these people that I've met throughout my life and all of the versions of them that help me. And sometimes I think that that's sweet. Sometimes I think it's sad. Sometimes I think it's very matter of fact and just the way people are. We take the best parts of others and, try our best to leave the rest behind. But regardless, when I put pen to paper and that was the first thing that my mind spit out, I couldn't believe it. That's my air. It was almost like I knew that that's what my head was like, but I've never had anything tangible in this reality to show that this is what my head is like. So like I said, having it now feels incredibly personal and vulnerable. Even though in the past year and a half that I've been trying to show my illustrations a little bit more from this collection, to me, it felt gut-wrenching at first to share. As much as it feels like a diary to me, this feels like a diary entry. This almost feels like a whole diary in itself. This feels very me. And as much as it feels that way to me, it doesn't to other people. That's the thing about art, I think. And the more I've shared these illustrations, the more I've realized that the way that I interpret it, the way that I meant it, isn't always the way that it lands. And it's been so interesting to see other people identify with it or give things meaning or see things from a completely different perspective. And somehow putting it out there makes it feel less scary and less heavy. I know that this is me. And it can also be so many other things. And I think that's really cool. I've never been able to really in-depth explain any of these illustrations. So for the first time, this is everyone I've met lives in my head explained.